This is massive news. After months of rumors, Sony Pictures and Marvel Studios have announced that Spider-Man will officially be joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yup, that's right. February 9th, 2015, that was most likely the day you heard my voice break the sound barrier, because it was the same day that Sony and Marvel agreed to work with each other so that they could bring Spider-Man into the MCU. Although I was pretty sad at the time that Andrew Garfield would not be getting his third movie, as I was enjoying his version of the character, I would have been crazy not to think that Spider-Man joining the MCU wasn't one of the best ideas ever. And come today, it would be one of the best ideas ever for a lot of people, because some consider Tom Holland to be their definitive Spider-Man, to where general audiences were very welcoming of his version of the character, although there is a large chunk of very vocal Spider-Man fans who think Spider-Man joining the MCU was one of the worst things to ever happen, because Tom Holland's Spider-Man just does not encapsulate the character. And where do I fall in that line of thinking? Somewhere in the middle, but let's go ahead and get started with Spider-Man Homecoming from 2017. Now, it's kind of interesting that before we even hit play on Spider-Man Homecoming, we have to know a little bit of backstory of the way Spider-Man was even introduced into the MCU through Captain America Civil War. This is one of the things already that makes this version of Spider-Man wildly different, because now he's no longer in a universe where he's all by himself and is the only unique superhero, thus taking away that little special factor that some have when watching a movie, knowing that Spider-Man was the only person protecting the city or the world at that time. But me, I actually kind of like this, because we do live in an age now where we just get superhero movie after superhero movie, that the magic of a superhero film has kind of died down. I'm not saying that the genre is dying or it's going away anytime soon, because that ain't happening, but Spider-Man no longer becoming a special character because there's dozens upon dozens of heroes in this world, I think fits in line with the era that we live in, because times are changing. Specifically, how I thought about Tom Holland's introduction into the MCU? Let me just go ahead and show you what Skinny Chris thought at the time. Holy... Obviously, I really like the introduction of Spider-Man in Civil War, even if I was scared at the time, because this would be one of the first times an actor would be younger than me playing Spider-Man. Every other time I'd be watching a Spider-Man movie, the actor would be older than me, where I just had that unconscious feeling of, man, I'm looking up to you and I want to grow up to be just like you someday, to now, Tom Holland and I are months apart, where I was like, damn, if I just laid off the cheeseburgers and took some acting lessons, could have been me. Jokes aside though, I thought what the Russos did with introducing the character was perfect, with just those sprinkle of scenes showing the young and naive Spider-Man here, where we got to look at his struggling life.
Didn't miss my train. This perfectly good DVD player was just sitting there, and algebra test. Nailed it.
Why are you doing this? I gotta know, what's your MO? What gets you out of that twin bed in the morning?
Look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
Even managing to sprinkle in little quotes about responsibility and what that means to Spider-Man, along with all the awesome quipping and interactions he's had with the MCU characters. It made me excited for Homecoming. I just hate that when I finally got down to watching the movie, I just did not know how to feel about it. For starters off here, with the way the movie opens up and it sets up the villain origin story for the Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, it's awesome now that the movie takes advantage of its MCU connections and has it be one of the reasons for why the Vulture goes evil here is because Tony Stark's damage control company took away work from him that could have possibly cost him his house and even his family's comfort, putting him in a position where he feels like he's forced to steal. And even though it kind of does bother me now that the Vulture, I feel, feels more like an Iron Man villain than a Spider-Man villain, I really like this incarnation of the character. I felt at this moment he's one of the best Spider-Man villains since Sandman in Spider-Man 3. Not to mention the fact that his Vulture suit is absolutely amazing. Leaving from there, entering the movie, it is this first half that had me feeling extremely rocky watching the movie for the first time, where I was like, this doesn't feel like Spider-Man. One, when you reboot a movie, you obviously want to do something wildly different, and that's what is done here. We get to see a little travel vlog where Spider-Man was going through the course of Civil War, and we even get to see the origin of how he was given the Tony Stark suit, which is already one of my main problems with this Spider-Man. There's a laundry list of reasons why, but I'm fully aware that this suit does look amazing. I like how comic accurate it looks, the way that they gave the Spider-Man expression eyes, and he no longer needs to take his mask off for dumb reasons so the actor can actually act. The suit is now capable of doing that himself, but one of the reasons I dislike this is because Marvel for some reason got into the habit of just filling this suit with a layer of CGI. This isn't the first time they do this in a Spider-Man movies. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield also had moments in their Spider-Man films where they were completely covered in CGI because they were doing stunts or action sequences, but for the MCU Spider-Man, he's covered in CGI almost 100% of the time when he's not even doing anything that requires it. It just creates this feeling where I'm not actually watching a human being and I'm looking at a 3D video game character that I would understand maybe why the face itself needs to be CGI because of its expression eyes, but the rest of the suit, it just comes off a little too slick and clean where it doesn't feel like there's a human body in that suit. More on why the suit is a little hard for me to love as we go on with this movie, because then we're introduced to the mentor character of this film, Tony Stark. That would be one of the clauses that Sony introduces with Marvel, that every time they do one of these joint movies, they need to bring in one of their main star MCU characters to be there with Spider-Man. And the first person off the bat is Iron Man here, which I thought was a good choice. Made sense marketing wise. I only wish I knew then what I know now, that this would kind of be one of the catalysts that makes me annoyed with MCU Spider-Man. And it sucks to say that the shadow of Iron Man eventually becomes so large on Spider-Man that it becomes a little unbearable for me, because I do like the interactions that Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland have. Their chemistry is just natural, and you really do get a genuine sense that Iron Man in this movie feels there is big potential in Spider-Man and just wants to train him on the path to be better than him. So once Spider-Man is brought home and he's eager, hoping to hear for his next Avengers mission, but ends up just going back to his normal boring life, is something I would have loved to have seen, because we do get hints of this struggling Spider-Man who takes public transportation, has a cracked phone, getting glimpses of his high school life with a new interpretation of Flash Thompson, who is no longer the big handsome jock of the school, but instead just a rich brat who thinks he's better than everybody else and bullies Peter. That's a change I don't mind with. Not every character has to be absolutely comic accurate. Just like I also really like the inclusion of Ned in here, a character that is new into the live action Spider-Man movies, even if he is someone from the comics here, because the chemistry between Peter and Ned works for me. It's I guess when we get introduced to Zendaya's character that I'm just kind of confused why the movie did this. Because by the end of the film we learn that this character's name is Michelle, but she prefers to go by the name MJ. And if you're a Spider-Man fan, the name MJ should definitely ring a bell to Mary Jane, and I just don't understand the creative decision to introduce someone like MJ that should obviously be Mary Jane, but actually it's not Mary Jane at all. We're just saying it's MJ. That's one of the things I hate about when you reboot a character. Sometimes the movie just feels too intimidated to bring back in old recurring characters. Like, we already did Harry Osborn twice in the previous two universes, so there's no way you're gonna see Harry Osborn in this current trilogy. We did Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane, so we're not exactly gonna do them, but we want people to recognize who Spider-Man's true love interest will be one day, so let's just name her MJ. Oh, and since we're on the subject of changing characters widely, let's just go ahead and turn Aunt May hot. That seems to be the only character trait we get for her, as the movie just constantly likes to remind you that people think she's hot.
Hey, May. How you doing? What are you wearing? Something skimpy, I hope.
How's your aunt?
Yeah, she's all right.
La tía de una italiana que está buenísima.
Well, we didn't order that.
It's on the house.
Oh.
Because in the last two Spider-Man movies, we had a wise and caring Aunt May that would sit down and give advice to Spider-Man. Can't have that this time around. It's reboot, baby. Still, there are familiar things that they do in this first half of the Spider-Man movie that get me excited, like seeing Spider-Man do some street-level crime fighting. Although I don't completely love the song they chose for this sequence, I'm always a sucker to see Spider-Man do some street-level crimes, especially when one of them includes one of the last Stan Lee cameos we will ever get for a Spider-Man movie. Ugh, miss you, Stan. And although us, the audience, might love Spider-Man doing some street-level crime fighting, at this current moment, Spider-Man has already had a taste of what it is to fight with the big guys. He feels like he should be doing more with himself.
I'm just feel like I could be doing more. You know, just curious when the next real mission's gonna be.
And well, asking you shall receive. That is what Spider-Man is granted here when he looks over and a couple of goons are about to rob some ATMs. This is where we get another cool scene in Spider-Man Homecoming where I think Tom Holland really does capture the quipping and charm that Spider-Man has when he's fighting some goons.
Oh, you'd be more handsome in person. Oh, Iron Man! Hey, what are you doing robbing a bank? You're a billionaire. I'm starting to think you're not the Avengers!
It's a good sequence that I didn't appreciate at the time just because I felt like Spider-Man was just being very reckless and I was like, man, this kid is just getting away with destroying stuff without any consequences. Little did I know that's actually done on purpose, and a big theme of Spider-Man Homecoming is for Spider-Man to learn to not be so reckless with his abilities. Because after his friend Ned finds out that he is Spider-Man, and then Ned goes ahead and tells the whole school that Peter Parker knows Spider-Man and he should invite him to the school party, this Spider-Man does what we've seen a lot of Spider-Man do previously, and that is use his powers and abilities for his own personal gain, for some popularity and street cred in his school.
When I say penis, you say Parker! Penis! Penis!
To where we get a really great shot of Spider-Man looking down at his teenage peers and kind of realizing, is what I'm doing right? Should I be doing this with my powers? And that is something that I think is in line with Spider-Man, and just a sprinkle of nugget that I do like that they included in there. But before Spider-Man can make the decision on whether to do this or not, he looks off to the distance and sees some explosions going on, forcing Spider-Man to go and investigate. To where they even have a little fun and explain what happens when Spider-Man doesn't have a building to swing on. Bringing us to a couple of goons who work for Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, selling some of their weapons. This is where we get introduced to Donald Glover's the Prowler, who comic book fans should know very well is supposed to be the uncle of Miles Morales, some great world building that I hope eventually pays off somehow in the MCU, because there are things that are set up in this movie that it looks like MCU Spider-Man might just never touch upon again. But that's not the only Spider-Man comic villain in this scene, as we also get introduced to the Shocker here, who can really only be noticed by his comic book accurate sleeves, in what I wish Spider-Man Homecoming had the guts to lean in to the Shocker character a little more and give him a comic book look. It's a small nitpick maybe, but I think it would have gone a long way if whichever version of the Shocker, because we do get two in this movie.
Yeah. Now you're the Shocker.
If one of them was given the full suit and mask so that they didn't just feel like a regular goon with a couple of weapons on their arm. But Spider-Man now seeing some crime activity go down, he feels like it's his responsibility to stop it, showcasing us more of his recklessness with his abilities and powers, where he causes a lot of destruction on some of the nearby homes. But right as it was looking like Spider-Man was going to be able to catch these villains and take them down, that's when we get the entrance of the Vulture meeting Spider-Man, picking him up and throwing him to the ground, where because of his new $1 million suit, it has a parachute. And if that safety net wasn't enough for you, we have Iron Man, who's constantly looking in on Spider-Man, rescuing him from drowning. This is where, again, I just get conflicted with this version of Spider-Man, because throughout the movie, you're just showing us his daily life and struggles. But it's kind of hard to do that when he literally equips a multi-million-dollar suit that does so much for him that it takes away that struggle of being Spider-Man, and it feels like sometimes you strip away showing his intelligence and creativeness with his powers to make do with what he's got. But there's one thing that kind of also bothers me about Spider-Man Homecoming is, for some reason, this Spider-Man has changed his mind on school. This Peter Parker says it a lot throughout the movie, where he makes it clear he kind of doesn't care about going to school anymore, attending his classes, or heck, maybe even going to college someday.
Oh, how's school?
You know, it's boring. Got better things to do.
You know, it's never too early to start thinking about college.
No, I don't need to go to college.
Mr. Stark is no longer connected.
But we have a Spanish quiz.
Ned, I'm probably never gonna come back here.
You want to be a high school dropout?
I am so far beyond high school right now.
Where literally one of the things I admired so much about Civil War was just that little line of Tony offering to send him to Germany to fight Captain America, but Spider-Man wanted to stay because he had a test in school. That feels like a Peter Parker thing.
I can't go to Germany.
Why?
I got homework.
I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that.
No, I'm being serious. I can't just drop out of school.
Might be a little.
Even when he goes back to his decathlon team, not because he feels like he made a commitment and responsibility to that team to not let them down, but because he feels it's a good excuse to follow the bad guys to DC where they're headed. An interesting choice for a Spider-Man movie, as I might add, because this now being the 6th film in the Spider-Man franchise, we have seen Spider-Man in New York plenty of times where I'm open to some change, and sending Spider-Man to DC was a welcomed inclusion for me, and I thought was a nice change of scenery for the character. Finally, here in DC, as they're tracking the bad guys, we also get a look at Spider-Man doing some digging on his suit, wanting to figure out a little bit more of the tech behind it. Not to mention, this most likely also seems a hint to the black and gold suit we'll eventually see in Spider-Man No Way Home. I thought there was a great opportunity to be had here in these scenes, where Spider-Man comes to realize exactly how much tech is built into this suit, and all these protocols that are being blocked because Iron Man doesn't believe Spider-Man is ready for that yet. I would have loved it if this version of Peter went ahead and realized he doesn't need that much tech to be Spider-Man, and would rather just disable all of that, but instead goes ahead and enables it all because he thinks he should have access to it. And even then, with me still feeling a little indifferent on this Spider-Man, the movie still includes little snippets of the Peter Parker personality that I recognize, to where he's off to go follow those goons. The rest of his classmates are headed to the hotel pool to have some teenage fun. Sadly though, because Spider-Man is here for a mission, he sacrifices the fun he should be having as a teenager to go do some superhero work. Stuff I kind of wish they included more in this movie, but I'm glad it was still in here nonetheless. Even though it's a moment I can't enjoy very much, because right away we're introduced to Spider-Man having an AI in his suit.
So where would you like to take me tonight?
I put a tracker on someone. He's a bad guy.
Tracker located.
I know I'm probably sounding like a whiny, complaining Spider-Man fan here, but I just cannot get behind the amount of tech and everything that the Spider-Man is given throughout this sequence. The overkill on just the variations on web shooter abilities, the kill mode activation, or the fact that he can talk to an AI is just giving me Iron Man Jr. vibes. I know, I don't like saying it either. And it is because of this tech and AI in his suit that makes the whole scene of him being locked in this vault kind of hard for me to watch, because it doesn't feel like I'm watching Spider-Man.
What if she's expecting someone like Tony Stark? I mean, imagine how disappointed she'd be when she sees me.
Well, if I were her, I wouldn't be disappointed at all.
Still, eventually Spider-Man finds out that the little device that him and Ned have been carrying around as evidence is actually an explosive device waiting to pop at any moment, making Spider-Man rush to the aid of his friends, where he does arrive a little too late. And this is just more sequence of stuff I would have loved to have seen how Spider-Man handles it on his own, out of his element, not in a city he's familiar with. We get tiny hints of that with how he's dealing with the height struggle of this monument, but it's just a small inclusion of having X-ray vision, Karen informing him of every little detail involved here.
125 seconds until catastrophic failure.
What? Why?
Unexpected motion has caused the deterioration to escalate.
With how many minutes he has left, the structural integrity of the elevator, it's all stuff Spider-Man would never be aware of or know about, but is just handed to him, taking away all that struggle. Nevertheless, Spider-Man saves the day, is able to come back home safely with his friends, just getting detention for missing his decathlon as Peter Parker, where his mind is still on wanting to catch those goons and exactly what is going on with those weapons, bringing him to interrogate Donald Glover's character, the Prowler.
Remember me? Hey, I need information. You can give it to me now.
Again, more unnecessary uses of the tech in a scene that could have been really cool to me, especially with the little hints of Miles Morales thrown in there.
I don't want those weapons in this neighborhood. I got a nephew who live here.
It eventually leads Spider-Man to know that a weapons deal is going down on a ferry, and if Spider-Man can go ahead and catch them all there, he can finally prove to Tony Stark that he is a real hero, and even catching some bad guys in the process. Because we get another showcase of Spider-Man being reckless with his abilities, with him not realizing that Tony Stark did actually listen to his cries, where the FBI was there all along to take these guys down, but because Spider-Man showed up and tipped them off early, he accidentally caused an unnecessary confrontation that led to this ferry breaking in half. And what I thought was a really great sequence of Spider-Man trying his hardest to put this thing together, spewing his webs all over the place, kind of reminded me of Toby, just stretching his body out, ultimately failing at the task until Iron Man shows up to save the day, effortlessly, I may add. Finally bringing us to this version of Spider-Man actually dealing with some consequences and Tony Stark talking him down.
I'm 15.
No, this is where you zip it, all right? The adult is talking. What if somebody had died tonight? Different story, right? Because that's on you. Okay, it's not working out. I'm gonna need the suit back.
For how long?
Forever. Yeah, that's
No, please, 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 Mr.
Let's
Stark,
have it.
you don't understand. Please, this is all I have. I'm nothing without this suit.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it. Okay?
And this is why I was mentioning that Spider-Man Homecoming was a mixed bag for me during first watch, because everything I had seen up until the point of Tony Stark taking away the suit from Peter Parker, I was absolutely hating. All of this for me to just find out that the movie was doing it on purpose and that Spider-Man needed to learn the lesson that the tech, the suit, the admiration he has for Iron Man and wanting to be an Avenger is not what Spider-Man is about, making everything that happens after Spider-Man loses the Tony Stark suit an absolutely amazing Spider-Man movie. This is where I just started loving the film so much, and it feels like the movie just took a 180 turn, because my complaints with Aunt May just being reduced to this hot aunt go away when she actually becomes a parental figure in Spider-Man's life, where she says,
"Cut the bullshit. I know you left detention. I know you left the hotel room in Washington. I know you sneak out of this house every night. Peter, you have to tell me what's going on."
Peter Parker then trying to rebalance his life and put his priorities into place, like his friends, going to school, even asking his crush out to the homecoming dance, all felt things reminiscent to Spider-Man, because as soon as it looks like his life was then starting to get in order, boom, he gets hit with a bombshell reveal that Adrian Toomes the Vulture is actually the dad of his high school crush. This was a twist I really liked in Spider-Man Homecoming and I did not see coming at all. It's very common a lot of the times in the comics that sometimes the villain is connected to people in Spider-Man's life. I think even Dr. Octopus at one point dated Aunt May. So something like this felt very much in line with Spider-Man, and just Tom Holland's acting here with his face of absolute disbelief and not knowing exactly what to do here, that the man he's been chasing down has been in front of him the whole time. Even worse, that he's connected to the person he likes, all leads us to this cinematic scene of Adrian Toomes driving Peter and Liz, where he slowly starts to uncover that, oh my god, Peter Parker, Pedro, is Spider-Man.
It's terrible what happened down there in DC, though. Were you scared? I bet you were glad when your old pal Spider-Man showed up in the elevator, though.
Yeah, well, I actually didn't go up. I saw it off on the ground. Very lucky that he was there that day.
Good old Spider-Man.
I love the use of lighting in that scene, how quickly Adrian Toomes went from being a dorky dad to then pulling out a gun and threatening the life of Peter Parker. I was honestly in disbelief the first time watching this movie, like, damn, I can't believe I was disliking this film to now I'm really liking everything they're doing. Because just now, as Peter Parker is learning that Adrian Toomes is the Vulture, he makes his decision to be Spider-Man once again, leaving his homecoming date behind, grabbing his homemade suit that is the best homemade suit of any Spider-Man movie, even because they managed to still get the expression eyes on this suit. And I also love how it resembles the Ben Reilly Spider-Man suit. But the reason I love this sequence so much is because we start to get the proof of why Spider-Man really doesn't need that high-tech suit to be himself, as everything he's currently using right now is stuff he's had all along. He doesn't have a fancy tracking device, so what does he do? He leaves his phone behind to follow Adrian Toomes. He re-equips himself with his old web shooters. And although it might be a little silly to have Ned as the guy in the chair feeding Spider-Man information, I still think it works.
What are you doing here? There's a dance.
I'm looking at porn.
Bringing us to Spider-Man encountering Adrian Toomes, where he felt all along that Spider-Man would follow him, setting up a trap, leading to what is my favorite moment of this entire movie, where Spider-Man Homecoming recreates the comic pages of the Spider-Man storyline, If This Be My Destiny.
Hello? Yeah, I'm down here. I'm down here. I'm stuck. I'm stuck. I can't move. I can't. Come on, Spider-Man. Come on, Spider-Man.
I cannot tell you the absolute joy I felt on my face seeing that sequence go down for the first time and knowing exactly from what comic panel it was. That to me was Spider-Man right there. Just the pain, the struggle, the being afraid, the overcoming it. Absolutely wonderful, man. And I think that's where it solidified me that, yeah, I really do like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I guess the only other downside I have to the second half of the movie is that just none of the action sequences between Spider-Man and the Vulture ever reach any of the Raimi or Andrew Garfield level of fight scenes. Like, they're suitable and entertaining to watch, but I just felt like there could have been some creative stuff done here instead of just a bunch of jumping, grabbing, and throwing here and there. Because even today, when I think about Spider-Man Homecoming, I can't think of a memorable action scene in the movie. Still, I love though that Peter Parker and Adrian Toomes, even though at odds, Peter still does the noble thing of wanting to save the life of the Vulture, to where he actually succeeds and we don't fall into that cliche Spider-Man thing of the villain accidentally killing himself, where Peter Parker successfully stops him from stealing the equipment of Avengers Tower, sending Adrian Toomes to jail, while we get what I think is another Sam Raimi inspired shot of Spider-Man off to the distance, kind of doing a victory stance in what I think is a really incredible shot of Peter Parker's Spider-Man. Leading us into the end of Spider-Man Homecoming that I don't feel completely nails it, where we have Tony Stark being proven wrong that Spider-Man is a worthy hero, one that's even worthy enough to join the Avengers, being shown his prize, the Iron Spider suit, where I remember for the first time, I was pretty damn happy and excited to see that, and like, damn, the Iron Spider suit, how crazy. Boy, wouldn't you know, Chris, you're eventually gonna hate that suit. I like that Peter Parker went ahead and made the decision of, no, I do want to focus on being a teenager, going to school, enjoying my relationships with friends as I can before I become this full-time superhero. It's exactly the words I wanted to hear out of this Peter Parker's mouth, where it's almost him rejecting, I don't want to be Iron Man, I want to be Peter Parker. It just sucks that one of the last shots of this movie is him getting back that Tony Stark suit that, although visually I like the way it looks, it's a great comic accurate suit, but if they just threw a line in there or a little sequence of Peter removing all the tech from that suit, I would be absolutely happy with that decision. But him receiving the suit isn't even a WTF moment, because the movie ends with Aunt May learning he's Spider-Man. And although you know me, I hate whenever Spider-Man's identity is revealed so often in the film, it goes to show you the promise and the different change of pace they were having in the Spider-Man universe, where we never really got to see Aunt May figure out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. Sure, you could argue that the other versions of Aunt May kind of figured it out, but we never knew it so blatantly here. So yeah, I wasn't completely in love with this version of Spider-Man, as that first half of Spider-Man Homecoming is always just a tough watch, but I always get turned around on this movie and happy with it once Spider-Man gets the Tony Stark suit taken away. And I have learned to put my biases aside of wanting a Spider-Man that's exactly like Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield. The Spider-Mans they deliver on screen can be wildly different while still having some of the same recurring messages go on. I think it's just the Marvel formula where things feel a little too happy and satisfying, where we don't get that gritty home field taste of Spider-Man, but I think it is still Spider-Man at the end of the day. Those are just my thoughts on Spider-Man Homecoming. I know there's people out there who absolutely love this movie, or those fans who do think that Spider-Man joining the MCU was the absolute worst mistake. I'd love to hear from all you down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at 3C Films or on TikTok at 3C Films. But as always, I'm Chris. Take care.